Hi, I'm Sabine from Pangolin Photo Safaris, and this is my review of Canon's RF 600 and 800mm f11 super telephoto lenses for Canon's mirrorless cameras. This is not a sponsored video, and I will give you my honest thoughts about the design, the autofocus capabilities, as well as the sharpness and image quality of these compact, light and affordable lenses based on my experience as a wildlife photographer. I've tested them on both the R5 and R6 bodies in various light conditions, and I will show you plenty of image examples throughout this review. Now, these two lenses have stirred quite a bit of controversy in the photography world when they were released last year, because of their fixed aperture at f11. And I myself was curious to see how they would perform in wildlife photography. Thanks to Canon South Africa, who were kind enough to lend them to us, I had the opportunity to shoot with the 600mm and the 800mm side by side for a few weeks now, right here in the beautiful Chobe National Park, Botswana. My biggest question was if the obvious advantage of the lightweight would be worth compromising on the light intake on these lenses. So stick around to the end of this video when I will give you my final verdict. Before I get started, my usual setup for wildlife photography is these two heavyweights. A Canon 200 to 400mm with built-in teleconverter and a Canon 500mm prime lens Mark II, both of them L-series lenses with a maximum aperture of f4. So I am very spoiled when it comes to performance and image quality. However, I'm not going to try and compare the far more affordable RF lenses to those two. And to put it into perspective for you, $11,000 and $9,000 for the L-series lenses versus $900 for the RF 800 and $700 for the RF 600 is quite a stretch. What I was interested in though, and I'm sure many of you too, is to see whether they could outperform a similar priced lens like the Sigma 150 to 600mm contemporary lens in terms of image quality. I will show you a few examples later on, but let's first look at the lenses in more detail. Both lenses come with Canon's RF mount for their mirrorless range. And the most outstanding and revolutionary feature, of course, is their compact size and ridiculously lightweight. At least for me, usually lugging super heavy lenses around. The RF 600 weighs only 930 grams and its bigger brother just over 1 kilogram. Ideal for shooting out of the hand. Now I won't break my back anymore waiting for a bird to take off. I can also maneuver much easier and react quicker to sudden action, and therefore won't lose out on shots that I probably would have with a big and heavy lens. Traveling with lenses like these will be a pleasure, not only for their lightweight, but also due to the collapsible design. When in storage mode, the 600mm measures just 200mm long, the same size as Canon's 70 to 200mm lens. And the 800mm is just slightly longer than Sigma's 150 to 600mm contemporary lens. This makes both lenses more portable than most super telephotos, and they easily fit into a medium-sized backpack, including two camera bodies. When using the lenses, the camera will prompt you to set the lens to its shooting position, which means that you need to twist the lock ring, extend the lens out and lock it again in its new position, which extends both of them by roughly 70mm. This was certainly something I had to get used to, especially when quickly changing lenses. Not to get frustrated and missing out on any shots, I eventually made a habit of extending the barrel right at the beginning of my safari so that the lens is ready to go whenever I need it. But you need to be cautious, as neither lens is weather sealed to any extent. And I think the extended part of the barrel could be prone to give issues if dust or moisture settles in. Even though I have used them during slight drizzles without any damage afterwards, I would recommend using a rain cover in very poor conditions. In terms of controls, there is the usual autofocus to manual focus switch, as well as a switch to enable and disable image stabilization. And the third one, to limit the focus distance, which can be restricted to work from 12 meters onwards on the RF600 and from 20 meters onwards on the RF800 for quicker focus acquisition. The wide manual focus ring works smoothly, and a great bonus on the RF lenses is the clickable custom ring that can be assigned to adjust common settings such as the ISO or exposure compensation. I really enjoyed using it for the latter, as I have to adjust to changing light conditions all the time. I just found it positioned quite close to the manual focus ring and not too well differentiated by touch, so that I often ended up turning the wrong wheel. The filter thread for the RF600 is 82 mm and 95 for the RF800. And since there is no lens hood included when purchasing either one of the two lenses, it might be a good idea to invest in a UV filter or buy the lens hood separately to protect your front lens element. I personally prefer to have the lens hood, as it also keeps dust and water spray at bay. There is no tripod collar on these lenses to be able to rotate them once mounted, like other telephotos have. Only these simple tripod feet. I guess it very much depends on what you shoot, how much that bothers you. For me, it wasn't a problem, since I feel the weight of both lenses is light enough to handhold even for longer periods of time. And I appreciate that cost and weight has been cut down instead. Something to consider when buying these lenses is the minimum focus distance, which is 4.5 meter on the RF600 and 6 meter on the RF800. Now, it took me a while to get used to that, especially when shooting with the longer focal length at 800 mm, as focus all of a sudden stops working when wildlife approaches you or when we were drifting towards a subject with our photo boats. If you like more reach, both lenses work with the rather costly RF 1.4 and 2x teleconverters, which respectively reduce the aperture to f16 and f22, but still maintain the ability to autofocus. Sounds quite ridiculous, right? Unfortunately, I did not have the chance to test them out, and therefore I can't give you an educated opinion. But if any of you have this setup, I would love to hear about your experience in the comments below. And as always, we do appreciate your support by taking a moment to like this video and subscribing to our channel. Thank you very much, and let's get on with the review, looking at the functionality of these lenses. A fixed aperture at f11 is what had most people appalled, and there is a few reasons for that. For one, the doubt that a narrow aperture of f11 can produce the soft and buttery smooth out-of-focus backgrounds we try to achieve in wildlife photography. Second, if fast autofocusing would be possible with the reduced light intake of an f11 lens. And third, the dreaded high ISO sensitivities resulting from shooting fast-moving subjects with high shutter speeds on such a narrow aperture. These are all valid concerns, but let's see how modern mirrorless cameras like the R5 and R6 can adjust to those issues. First, the background blur. On the one hand, long telephoto lenses create a strong background blur, but on the other hand, a narrow aperture has an increased depth of field. With both the RF600 and the RF800 f11, you have this exact scenario, as you cannot change the aperture at all. And essentially, it is what it is. These lenses can't produce the same shallow depth of field than a 600 mm f4 or an 800 mm 5.6 lens. But they also don't cost $13,000 US. Having said that, if you have never photographed with a 600 or 800 mm focal length, but only ever used shorter lenses, you can definitely expect more separation on f11 with these two lenses in comparison to what you're used to. That is because of the higher compression on a longer focal length, which is something I think people forget sometimes. So both lenses are able to produce a decent background blur, Of course, as with any lens, the closer the subject is to the minimum focus distance, the better the results, and I'm really pleased with many of the images I've taken during the last few weeks. If the subject itself is in deeper foliage like woodlands and reeds, it will be harder to get a usable image as backgrounds become busier and distracting. But knowing the limitation of an f11 lens simply means you need to work a bit harder on your composition. Pleasing bokehs are definitely possible to achieve, and I was pleasantly surprised in that regard. Something I noticed in a few images was these concentric circles within the defocused highlights, resulting from using the RF lenses with diffractive optics. Most of the time they don't bother, only when they are close to the image center. I sometimes found them too accentuated and distracting. Switching our attention to the autofocus capabilities, my assumption that autofocus might be slow because of the dimmed light intake practically disappeared under fair conditions. The EOS R bodies are able to provide excellent autofocus with the f11 lenses. They are designed to work together, and that they do very well. While the generous depth of field created by the f11 aperture does not challenge autofocus precision, this lens has reliably focused accurately for me. And I loved making use of the animal eye tracking. The autofocus area, however, is reduced from the full frame to a large square in the center, which results in about 40% coverage horizontally and 60% vertically. It can be quite a challenge to keep erratic moving subjects inside of that square. Tracking a bird in flight with a fixed lens like a 600mm and especially an 800mm is not easy, and the bird often strays outside of that area where autofocus isn't possible anymore. Another downside is that I'm limited with composing images freely and therefore precise focusing. Here is an example. Whenever I got too close to a subject and tilted the camera into portrait orientation, I could not focus on the eye without cutting off some part of the animal. And even that f11 is generally more forgiving with slightly missed focus. It is not if the subject is very close to you. To be fair though, we must remember that we were once happy when the DSLR could focus an f8 lens using only the center autofocus point. Plus, the reduced coverage is similar to the AF point spread width of many DSLRs. So in summary, you just have to be more careful with framing to achieve autofocus, which is something I adapted to quickly. Combined with the EOS R5 and R6 bodies and their excellent tracking capabilities, autofocus on both lenses felt equally responsive, accurate and quiet. Even in low light, autofocus was still considerably good, but slightly better on the R6, which operates in light levels of up to -6.5 EV compared to -6 EV on the EOS R5. Talking about low light, both lenses feature optical image stabilization. The RF800's image stabilization system is rated at 4 stops, 1 stop lower than the RF600, which offers up to 5 stops of shake correction. Perhaps due to the same system capability with an increased focal length. In combination with the 5-axis in-body stabilization of the EOS R5 and R6, I could yield a few reasonably sharp images on shutter speeds as low as 1/13 of a second, if the subject was motionless, of course. But the image stabilization doesn't just help to get usable images at extremely slow shutter speeds. It also increases autofocus precision, as the camera's autofocus system can produce better focus precision if the image it sees is stabilized. And another benefit is the use of image stabilization in video work. There's a significant difference between the stability of a handheld shot with stabilization enabled compared to when the stabilizer is turned off. The third concern was how shooting at high ISOs will impact the image quality, and while I chat, I will show you some examples. In wildlife photography, we frequently reach for fast shutter speeds to freeze the motion of moving subjects, and even when we aim at static animals, we like to have a fast shutter dialed in just in case of sudden movement or action. A fast shutter speed in combination with an f11 lens naturally means that we are relying on much higher sensitivities than normal. And with both the RF600 and the RF800, I rarely shot on ISOs lower than 1,000th of a second in broad daylight. More often, I was moving between ISO 1600 and 6400, and beyond that in heavy overcast conditions or once the light fell. This is simply unavoidable with these lenses, but the question is whether the resulting images are acceptable for you. Canon's R-series mirrorless full-frame cameras have come a long way, and as you see in these examples, they can deliver greater detail and cleaner images than you would expect from these ISOs. Nevertheless, I'm not going to deny that I often stopped shooting once the ambient light got low, or sacrificed the risk of motion blur by lowering the shutter speed in exchange to keep the ISO from rocketing to insane values. Neither a great option in wildlife photography, because the good stuff often happens during the early or late hours of the day. Essentially, if you want a faster lens suitable for low light conditions, you need to invest a lot more money and carry much heavier gear. Okay, let's look at the image quality and sharpness. Because neither lens is able to change its aperture, teleconverters left out of the equation, this will be quick. Here we are looking at the 600mm f11 on the EOS R6, and zooming in reveals a very reasonable sharpness with lots of fine detail. Let's have a look at a few more shots with this lens while I keep talking. I won't go into technicalities about corner sharpness, as the corners are typically not in focus when photographing wildlife anyway. In good contrast and light, I don't think you can fault the sharpness of this lens. And while not razor sharp, the image quality produced by far exceeds what is required for social media imagery. Now switching to the RF 800mm f11 on the EOS R5, and again the results can look great and sharp across the frame. The contrast and colors look good, and because of the diffractive optical elements in both lenses that help reduce chromatic aberrations, they are very well controlled and hardly noticeable. There is a mild amount of vignette, but nothing that can't be corrected by your image software. All in all, my expectations for the amount of money the lenses cost has been exceeded in terms of image quality. I did mention in the beginning of the video that I was curious to see how they would compare to the Sigma 150 to 600mm contemporary lens. And here you can see it side by side with the same settings and frame taken on the RF600. I generally found the RF600 to be slightly sharper than the Sigma lens, which could be expected from a fixed lens versus a zoom lens. Comparing the background rendering with the f11 on the RF lens and an aperture of 6.3 on the zoom lens, needless to say that the wider aperture creates a more out of focus look, but I did not find it exceptionally different, and I can happily live with what the RF600mm produces. When using my 1.4 teleconverter on the Sigma lens, the maximum focal length is 840mm at f9. That's less than a stop smaller than the f11 on the RF800. For a fair comparison, I stopped the Sigma lens down to f11, and as you can see, also here the RF lens is slightly sharper. And here is the difference in the bokeh at f11 on both lenses. So you see, there's not too much of a difference in terms of image quality between these lenses. The biggest difference is that with the RF600 and the RF800 f11, you restrict yourself to a single focal length, whereas the zoom option on the Sigma lens gives you more freedom, but also heavier gear to carry. But at the 600mm end, the maximum aperture is f6.3. That's 1.6 EV faster than the Canon lenses. I hope this gave you a good idea. And to wrap things up, I will name a few things that I like about the RF600 and the RF800 and a few things that I don't. Number one, I found it very liberating how simple it is to shoot with these lenses. There is no zoom, and having only f11 available simplifies the exposure calculations. Only the shutter speed and the ISO remain available for image brightness control. And since I use manual mode with auto exposure enabled, I now only need to worry about setting the correct shutter speed and exposure compensation. Number 2, of course, the ultra lightweight of both lenses. Until using them and feeling the difference to my own gear, I hadn't realized how important the weight factor is and how much more I enjoyed being out and about photographing. These are the kind of lenses that I spontaneously would take out on a walk with me, which is something I never do with my 200-400 f4 or 500mm f4 prime lens, because they are simply too heavy for me. Number 3, the combination of the in-body stabilization in the EOS R bodies and the optical lens stabilization within the RF600 and the RF800. Extremely helpful on such long telephotos, and I especially enjoyed being able to film short video clips out of the hand, getting non-shaky, usable footage. And now to the negatives. For one, I don't like that there is no weather sealing whatsoever present on either lens. And even though I do understand that Canon has released them as budget lenses, I would have wished that there was at least a basic sealing applied. Number 2 is only a small criticism, and that is the restricted focus area, which did prove to be limiting a few times, especially when in portrait orientation. And thirdly, well, the fixed aperture at f11. Although I appreciate the primary goals behind the design, like the lightweight and affordability, I don't want to be limited during the time of day when wildlife is most active. So, circling back to my first question, if the advantage of the lightweight would be worth compromising on the light intake on these lenses, the answer is, well, yes and no. Because in the end, it depends who this lens is for, and that brings me to my final conclusion. For serious wildlife photographers that are used to high quality glass, the answer in my opinion is no. If you make money with your images, you are most likely willing to accept the dreaded weight and high prices to get the best image quality and performance possible. Unless you have a few extra bucks to spare and get either one of the two for some casual use in good light conditions next to your pro gear. But for everyone else that wants a lens that is fun to shoot, that likes to go on hikes with their gear or does a lot of traveling and therefore wants a lightweight, compact and affordable telephoto lens, the answer is definitely yes. Now the question is just which one of the two? I must say I enjoyed shooting with both lenses equally, but I found myself reaching more often for the RF800. We have beautiful bird life here in Chobe National Park, and if you have a passion for birds, I definitely recommend this lens. Just be aware that you will have a more narrow field of view to find your subject within the viewfinder. The longer focal length does, however, limit you when photographing bigger game. And unless you want to have fun and experiment with close-ups, the RF600mm will give you a bit more flexibility. Either way, when mounted on an R5 or R6 body, both lenses, used in the right conditions, are fun to shoot and offer a decent setup for wildlife photography for those with limited budgets, opening up two products that were up until now literally out of reach for a lot of people. In the comments below you can find a few RAW files of both the RF600 and the RF800mm if you like to have a closer look at the image quality and sharpness. Let me know what you think, and thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you very soon here in Chobe National Park, Botswana. Keep well and goodbye.